But again,
Live on Twitch.
yeah, that stream should work. I'm gonna fire that up on Facebook too, because when I tag you, it should show up on your link as well. And then before my stream starts, I usually play Canadian music, and I found this new guy who was nominated for the Junos, rapper. His name's Lou Phelps.
Phelps?
Really good, man.
Never heard of him.
Yeah, I know, man. Junos, I don't know, man. Junos does a really good job at introducing us to artists, but it's hard to discover new talent, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Does anybody watch the Junos?
No.
Like, who watches the Junos?
Look, I wish I did, but like I usually go back a week later and then I go through the list and I look up the people afterwards. I don't know if you do that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well,
no, I don't. I don't pay any attention.
You just listen to Spotify. Last time I was at your house, you just put Spotify on.
Yeah, that's my Juno.
And then I was talking to
that's my Juno playlist.
I was talking to my other friend who's an artist himself, and he was like, and we were talking about how like Spotify chooses and is very selective on who plays what gets played and stuff. So it's kind of stacked against emerging artists, in my opinion. But
right, yeah.
What's my opinion anyway?
You gotta go on SoundCloud.
SoundCloud. That's right. SoundCloud. Anyway, Teru, thank you for joining me tonight. This has been a long time coming. We've been trying to set this up for a month now, I think. More than a month.
Yeah, man.
But life gets in the way. How are things with you in the 6?
In the 6. Just running through the 6 with my woes.
Oh my god.
That's all I'm doing, man.
Actually, anywhere else in Canada other than Toronto, when they say the 6, they think it's really cool, but when I'm in Toronto and I say the 6, it's not so cool.
Yeah, I mean, like in a conversation, I've never heard anybody say like, "Oh, like you hitting the 6? Yo, you wanna go to the 6?
Yeah.
Yo, dog, what's good in the 6?" Nobody says that.
You see out here they do. Out here in Calgary, out here
do they?
in Alberta,
Yeah.
they do that. But
Yeah.
anyway, thanks for joining me again, and we'll talk a little bit
Thank you.
about you, because I think I don't actually, interestingly enough, we hang out a lot when we're together, but I don't really know your transition from high school into university. I don't really know much of your background, but before we go into that, I know you now as a writer, a sports writer. I've read some of your work.
Thank you.
You've been doing a lot of writing on hoops in Canada. You focus primarily on Canadian.
All basketball.
What's that?
All basketball.
All
yeah.
basketball, yeah. And you focus primarily on Canadian athletes, which is very exciting. I think we need more of that in this country. More focus on Canadian talent, Canadian goods, Canadian product. But let's talk a little bit about you before you became the successful person that you are now.
I don't know about that. I'm still on the come up.
I met you through a mutual friend of ours, and at that time you guys were in school in Western, in London, Ontario.
Yes.
Before
The
that,
Rock.
where were you, my man?
Before Western?
Yes, before Western.
Before Western, how far back? Like high school?
Yeah, as far as you care to tell me, man. Some people don't like talking about their past so as fervently as some others.
So before university, I went to a private high school called Appleby in Oakville, Ontario.
I know about Appleby.
Very prestigious, very it's one of those private schools that you see in like movies, right? It's a very expensive private school. So I went there for 6 years. I did junior high there, and I went directly into university because it was something that everybody else did, and it was like an expectation for everybody to either go to like Queens, Western, U of T McGill.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second, Teru. Maybe you can give some of our viewers who are not from the Southern Ontario area. And when I say Southern Ontario, I'm saying the GTA.
Okay.
But let's talk a little bit about Oakville in perspective with Mississauga and Hamilton and Toronto. What is it about Oakville that makes Appleby like? Is there a particular reason why Oakville is that the private school area, or is that where people like? Did
Well,
your
yeah,
family grow up there?
yeah. Oakville's. I grew up in Mississauga or Saga. Um,
Saga.
yeah. Party next door.
Yeah.
Um, but Oakville is like a very affluent area, very white, very Anglo-Saxon, and that's where I guess a lot of people who want to start families
It's a
and are
suburb.
super successful, yeah, tend to commute from Oakville into downtown Toronto. So there's a lot of wealth in the city, or wealth in the city or town.
Hmm.
I don't know which one it is. And obviously, a lot of properties right near the water are usually expensive. So you have a lot of houses near Lakeshore that tend to be very, very nice homes. So a lot of kids from Oakville will go to Appleby, or not a lot, but a fair amount. And then while I was there, they started getting really heavy into their international recruitment. So people would come from, Nigeria, China, Australia. So it was very international,
Hmm.
but in some ways it's not really international because you just get like very wealthy kids from different countries,
Hmm.
right? So if you really want like multicultural and international, better off going to square one
Right.
or
Square one.
or 5 and 10, which are like sort of your hangout spots in Mississauga.
So diversity in uh, color, but not in wealth.
No, no, like homogeneous and wealth.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool. So,
yeah,
so it was almost like, well, I mean, I guess as a prestigious school such as Appleby, sort of expectation and the path for many students would be to hit one of those prestigious universities that are around. So, Western, McGill, and many of these other schools, universities.
right.
Cool.
hmm hmm So after that, what I did after high school is I did 1 year in the UK,
Oh,
and even though it's in the UK, it's a fortified manor that's owned by Queens. And what happened was that there's this Jewish guy that came into Canada, and this was right after the war or during the war. So he applied to McGill, Queens, and U of T, and because of his status, he was rejected from U of T and McGill. It's a complete like underdog story. So he gets into Queens, graduates, becomes like a billionaire. His name's Alfred Bader. Um, yeah, Alfred Bader, I think. So he just buys this fortified manor in this place like south of London and just gives it to Queens. So then Queens now has this like international study center in the UK, but it's pretty much a satellite campus. So I went there for 1 year because there's a 1 year like foundations program.
hmm.
So yeah, I did that for a year and then came back to Western. But even though I did that in the UK, I went there as a Western student.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Teru, you played ball. At what point? When did you start playing ball? And I know that you were a very good player in university. But did you
Yeah,
play
like
ball?
pick up. Yeah.
Yeah, did you play ball in high school, starting in high school, or all your life?
Yeah, I started I think in like when I was maybe 13.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was like the cool thing, right? Because there's like hip hop influence. It was just like a cool sport to play and pretty affordable. You don't have to do much. You just lace up and play.
Yeah.
So yeah, I probably started like 13, and then high school, I played throughout high school. I think I took like maybe a year off. And I like never lived up to my potential. I was like a Bruno Caboclo, if you know who that
I
is.
do. I do. I do.
Yeah. So, after I finish, I think like I'm skipping a few years, but I think like in university, I always wanted to like try out, or when I was in high school, like I was like, oh, it'd be nice if I could play college basketball. So like many years down the road, which was like 4 years later, I ended up transferring to Mount A because Mount A is Mount Allison out in New Brunswick, and I transferred out there because I wanted to like, give an open tryout a shot and try to make it as a walk-on. But I like broke my ankle 2 weeks before tryouts, so I couldn't try out with them. But I did like train with some of the guys on the team, and um, yeah, it was like a good life experience that way because I met a lot of people. I got to go to like Maine. I got to see other towns, university towns in the Maritimes, and it was just around basketball, which was really cool.
I actually have a friend of mine who talks a little bit about basketball out east. It's quite
Mhm.
competitive with some of the
Yeah,
universities out there.
yeah, yeah. Like Saint FX, which is in a town called Antigonish, Nova Scotia.
Right,
They're huge into basketball.
right.
So like the whole town gets into it. Maybe it's because there's not much to do. Um, but yeah, like their program is huge.
Hmm. Um, what is the difference between the basketball out there compared to the basketball here in Southern Ontario, or in Ontario at least? Is there a difference in competition? I mean, there's so many different things like that, like a competition, the way they play, the way they draft. What did you
Yeah.
notice as a player?
Well, I think like on a superficial level, there's like the race factor, right?
Right.
Like here, most of your like Team Ontario guys, best guys in the city are black. Out there, it's mostly white. I mean, there's a big black population in Nova Scotia, but yeah, it tends to be different race wise.
Mm-hmm.
As far as like game, the different style of play, I think like people in Toronto or I guess more urban areas. Um, are better ball handlers, or faster, they're maybe more aggressive. Um, but that's more of a stereotype, I think.
Right.
Like, you can be from, French Lick, Indiana,
Yeah.
or you could be from like, the boonies and still be very aggressive. But I think, yeah, I think they're more out east. I think they're more like shooters, and I think it's more pass and team play, team oriented basketball.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in down in Toronto, it's more, individually focused, uh, ISO type of basketball, isolation basketball. But it's weird because, I think people are, because basketball, aside from the Raptors, like it's on the rise in Toronto, right? Um, People are so good, whether it's at the high school, junior high school, university level. Um, But I think that kind of culture, like basketball, Toronto basketball culture, is still being formed because a lot of guys, yeah, do end up playing, for a prep school down south. Um, so yeah, I think it's still trying to figure itself out.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Whereas like you go to New York and you'd say you don't even have to describe it. If you say like a New York point guard, there's a certain brand attached to that. Like you think of like Sebastian Telfair, or he's not a point guard, but you think of like Lance Stevenson. You say Chicago, you think of like Derrick Rose. You say LA basketball player, you think of like Jason Kidd or Gary Payton. Maybe I'm dated here. I'm definitely dated. Those guys are old. But yeah, like there's a certain brand attached to it, but I think Toronto basketball still doesn't really have like a brand. Um,
So let's talk about
yeah,
branding then. We looked at the
or an identity. Sorry.
an identity,
Yeah,
yes. And I was
yeah,
asking you earlier, be off stream, this organization that Canada has called, what originally called was known as was it Sika, or no? Actually, it's now called Youth Sports. This
yeah.
organization
So
brings across all across Canada that rallies up all the universities to bring the best athletes on all the different types of sports. I think 12 or 13 different sports. And they went through a huge rebranding. What was it used? What did they used to be called?
So it was CIS,
CIS.
and the SIC is just a French acronym for Canadian Inter-University Sports, I think.
And you know what's so funny when you say just a French acronym? Actually, the rebranding process of it was essentially made so that it could incorporate both French and Anglo-Saxon, like the identity of the because Canada is French and English, right?
Right, yeah.
So U
Yeah.
Sports, it was funny because I was watching the U Sports advertising. It was like they tried really hard to come up with a slogan or a brand that would encompass all of Canada. But back to U Sports. Oh, I had a viewer here who said odometers asked Maritimes equals brethren, and that's sort of like individual versus the collective, right? In the
Right, yeah,
basketball, which is a
yeah,
pretty good
yeah.
point he made.
Well, I mean, sorry, maybe I'm a little off topic, but like even when you say Maritimes, right? Like there's a brand that's attached with the Maritimes. You think of very friendly people. You may think of like donaires. You might think of like weed and a bunch of drunk people and just happy, cheery drunk people. Like that's what you think when you say Maritimes, but like when you say Toronto, I don't know. I just find that it's like it's still like figuring itself out.
Right.
Aside from like Drake, but like Drake is that's why I think Drake has such a big part to play in Toronto because he's sort of the guy that came in and like embraced Toronto as an identity, right? And then
Yeah.
it took all these people who are like not proud of this city to be like, oh, you know what? I'm from the six. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty cool, man. I support the Raptors, but like it took a while for I think people to like being from Toronto because I think historically people were just like I'm from Canada, whatever. It's
Right.
like a very Canadian attitude, right?
That's a very good point. Yeah, the
Yeah.
identity is Toronto is definitely still trying to find their own. We could talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the Raptors. Now back to U Sports. This
Yes.
organization, this bold, I guess like they're trying so hard to bring this huge country together. What do you know about U Sports? Because I've been only researching it slightly, but are the athletes in Canada what I think the purpose is to recognize Canadian athletes as good enough to sustain within Canada, to keep the talent in Canada, and that we can compete just as good, if not better, than some of the players down south. Because traditionally, we do have a lot of athletes in Canada being whatever sport being sort of like
Coached.
fed into the states.
Okay. So I can't speak for like other sports. Like I know nothing about like the badminton scene or football or
Right.
soccer. But with basketball, um, it's interesting. I'll first focus on like Ryerson. But the interesting thing about Ryerson basketball was that a couple years ago, like they were terrible, right? And I think it also helps that Ryerson University, for guys that don't know, it's in like the smack in the middle of downtown Toronto. So they started recruiting pretty heavy, and last year there was a guy named Aaron Best, and he went to Ryerson for all 5 years. And he tried out for the 905 Raptors, made the team, and has been like a solid contributor. And Carlton um, had this guy named Kaza Keen who he took a different route. What he did was he went down south, as you were just saying, to try and test the NCAA Division One waters, and that didn't work out for him. So he came back up to Canada and talked to Dave Smart, who's like a legendary basketball coach. Carleton actually is the most winningest university basketball program in all of North America. Um, so I think they have like a winning percentage of something close to like 95% or 96%, something
Wow.
ridiculous. So King played on the Carleton squad, and he also made the 905 Raptors. And he's proven that he's a solid defender. He's a good distributor as well. So those two making like a essentially an NBA G League squad, I think is gonna create like a pipeline, or if not a pipeline, at least it'll cause other youth sports players to be like, you know what, like I could actually, like I could maybe get to the NBA even if I play in Canada,
Hmm.
you know? So I think that's been huge. Recently at the national tournament, Ryerson. There was a huge upset because Ryerson was the only team that gave Carleton a defeat this year. So they beat Carleton, and Ryerson went to the finals, and then they played Calgary, the Dinos, and the Dinos beat the Ryerson Rams.
Wow.
So I think like yeah, I think even playing here, you could get all the exposure that you want, you know. I don't think, I mean, I'm not an athlete, so it's different, but I don't think that, playing in youth sports is necessarily going to hold somebody back, because I think a lot more people are like scouts and people in the basketball world um, are taking like, youth sports more seriously.
Hmm.
And going back to like Ryerson's recruiting, yeah, it's a big deal because they just recently brought in this rookie and he's like 7'1", and he's from Senegal. So they brought in this like prospect here, rather than having Canadians go somewhere else. Like there's a reverse
Hmm.
trend that's happening. Yeah,
So they shipped a player or an athlete from Senegal over to Canada to play.
yeah, and if my facts are correct, I think Ryerson has like sort of they rub elbows with the Raptors, right? So Masai Ujiri, who's the president, runs these African camps. Um, I think during the off season, and I think this Senegalese Ryerson player was discovered in one of the camps, in one of Masai Ujiri's camps, and then yeah, Roy Rana, who's the head coach of Ryerson, brought him over.
Here's a comment here. Only 12 players have ever been drafted from Upsports slash CIS. Let's hope for more.
Okay.
Yeah.
12 players
Hmm.
have been drafted for,
Sorry, U Sports. U Sports.
okay, from U Sports.
Yes.
Have been drafted for what?
Basketball.
Basketball. Okay.
Yeah. I think that's what the comment's been made. Okay,
Okay.
off the top of my head,
Yeah.
Teru, I'm thinking about NBA. NBA is the word.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
do you find that the logistics in our country, first of all, let's just say talent wise, playing basketball, having a central hub for people to represent a certain university. There's, from what I can tell, there's 56 universities, 53 or 56 universities across the country, and to
Okay.
and to
I didn't
sustain
know that.
sustain a really strong team, to generate the interest and have the level of competition to keep the boys playing at a certain level, or the girls, to keep the competitive level high. Do you find that Canada, because we simply lack population, we don't have as many people, that our competition is just going to be generally lackluster in comparison to the States? And also, when we talk about flying, like this competition, like the U Sports, transportation wise, when I want to fly a team out from Vancouver out to Toronto,
Right.
that's a 6 hour flight. How does that affect, or even out to the east? I guess they're different conferences and they only stick
Right.
within.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. Like Ontario has the OUA, which is its own conference.
Right.
People out in BC, Alberta have their like the U Sports West. Um, in the Maritimes, they had the AUS. So that's not as much of a problem. I think maybe the one of the challenges, and Ryerson has done a great job at this, is like to get fans out to the stands, right? To get them to come out to games.
Right.
And I, this is just more anecdote, but I think I think a lot of like smaller towns are trying to, like, the way they're marketing their team is, to make it seem like they're a huge, if the football team, if the Mount A football team, they play in Sackville, so I think they try to push it as like, this is the Sackville team, so come out and support them. So I think they try to annex like the university sports team
Hmm.
with like the identity of the town. Um, and I think like what Ryerson's done too is it's amazing. Sorry, I'm talking a lot about Ryerson,
No, that's okay.
but what they did was they for those of you that don't know, they like bought out half of the Maple Leaf Gardens, turned that into the Mattamy Athletic Center, half of its Loblaws, and yeah, they've just been on this huge marketing campaign to like bring people out. And Ryerson's traditionally seen as like a commuter school, so I think there was an opportunity to like tap into sports and be like, oh, come out to games. Like this is where you're gonna see your friends and teachers and other Ryerson people. So I think it's worked out pretty well. I mean, it's not huge, but I think for some of the playoff games, like 2,000 people came out, which is like pretty good for I think Canadian university sports.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
thinking about, you're making me think a lot about you know back to what you were saying of Masai Ujiri, and he brings players from Senegal, and now Canada is a spot for you. You had a sort of stint or kind of understanding of maybe perhaps other places in the world that want to compete in Canada. We want to speak on that a little bit, other than like maybe not NBA level, but college level, university level. Do you think Canada can do better at promoting themselves as a mecca for basketball players to come?
yeah. And I think like the actually I think the way that the Raptors will do this season will have a huge impact on that too, because you know y- you can go overseas now and probably if you find another basketball fan, they'll know who Kyle Lowry is, they'll know who DeMar DeRozan is, right? And it's only very recently that like the Raptors have been taken seriously, and like now we're like we're a force to be reckoned with. So I think if that grows, I think people will start seeing Toronto as like a basketball city.
Hmm.
And then once that happens, I think then you could be like, oh, like you play high school basketball in Dubai, like why don't you come to prep school in Canada, and you could have a legitimate shot at going to like a top U.S. school or even a Canadian school. So I think maybe not now, but I think in the very near future that will happen, because just on like an academic level, like Canada is very attractive, right? Like a lot of people come from Asia, Latin America, all over the world to like study in Canada. So I think if the Raptors like brand continues to grow, I think yeah, it'll attract more basketball players to come here.
Odometer said
And
it's the international flavor. Here he says international flavor. It's actually tough to live in the States, but the draw in Canada is strong for people from all
yeah,
over the world to come.
yeah,
Just like the Blue Jays and the Raptors all have.
right. And on a sort of another level, like not only is it just basketball, like I think Toronto as a sports city is blowing up right now. Like the Leafs are in the playoffs, the Raptors, people expect them to go to the finals. The Jays are doing better than expected. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting time to be involved in sports in the city right now.
Um, I think there have been conversations around, and I've heard it from friends, but NCAA,
Yeah.
would they ever consider a destination in Canada to host it?
So they have, well, I know Simon Fraser, I think, tried to play in the Division 2. They did try playing in NCAA games. Um, but you're saying, would that be a possibility?
Yeah, would that like is there in that context NCAA would Canada be involved in that way at any given time? Because I'm not really sure how, because I know NCAA
No,
is super
yeah,
hot, but I just know that
right.
there's conversations about
Yeah.
us being taking part of that.
Um,
Like, I mean, could it be possible that a Canadian team? I know it's all American, but would they ever allow a Canadian team to enter, or that is that Is that
Well,
possible?
that has happened, right? Because
Oh,
the Simon Fraser University, like they've tried it. I know they're not doing it now. Um, no, I think it is a possibility, but I think it's just the university experience too is different for the athletes too. Like here, um, it's not a full ride, and actually some of the attractiveness of going down south is that you can get a free ride, right? Like everything's comped. But here, yeah, you may have to pay for other stuff because it doesn't cover everything. Um, so yeah, like
Odometer says never. Those conferences are so tight. Conference fees, etc.
okay, okay,
I
yeah,
mean, that's his. He's. I guess that's one side of it.
okay. He's talking about Canada, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I think yeah, I think, and I don't even know if it's really in Canada's like Canadian universities teams' interests to join the NCAA, just because um, the NCAA is losing a lot of legitimacy too, right? This is like the first time where, maybe it's just talk, but people realize that, if you're a division, and I read this like in a very obscure like academic article, but in that article, it said how if you're like a Division One 5-star recruit, which means you're like a RJ Barrett, and we can talk about him later, but RJ Barrett's like a consensus number one 2019 NBA draft pick, right? So people are saying that his high school career could have been is maybe even better than LeBron's. And if you're a guy like that, and say you go to Duke, everything's comped, and and um, and yeah, you play for that team. You don't make any money out of that, but if you factor in like how much money he will bring to Duke, like 5-star recruits fair market value is around like $613,000, right? So, but people, I think it's not like radical to say like some of these players are like indentured servants. So sometimes if you're good enough, it may make even more sense to like just go pro directly. Like this is something that a guy like Brandon Jennings has done, where he went to Italy for 1 year after high school and then declared for the NBA. Um, so yeah, I don't even know if Canada wants like a Canadian team would really want to join the Big East and play against Michigan in the same conference. They do I know it's different because they do this in the preseason, like before Canada and before the NCAA season starts, they'll play against each other. I know it's not the same thing because it's not like it's not March Madness. It's far
right.
from it. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know
Okay.
if that's really in the Canadian university's interest to do
Okay.
that.
So let me let
Yeah.
me let me move on from the NCAA into the NBA. Why is there only one Canadian basketball team, and what happened to the previous one? And will there ever be potentially a second NBA team that's from Canada?
In Canada, yeah, I mean, why? Yeah, why did the Grizzlies disappear?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean,
If
if
there
you,
wasn't enough interest, right?
yeah,
Maybe Odometer
yeah.
uh, will have something else to say. It's just, yeah, I don't, yeah, I'm just assuming there wasn't enough interest in Vancouver, but there definitely is a lot of interest in, uh, different cities aside from Toronto, right? What I always find fascinating is that, like, people across this country, like, who are basketball fans, support the Raptors when they're so far removed from the city, which is something I've always had a hard time like understanding. Like
Yeah.
if you're
So
from
I'm out
Thunder
here in
Bay,
I'm out here in
like
southern Alberta
you're
right
not
now.
from Toronto. How do you love it, right?
So
Yes, say that again.
sorry. Yeah, you
You're
just
out
got
in
cut off.
southern Alberta.
Yeah, we're out in southern Alberta, and I mean we're so far apart from the city, and some of my students will probably never go to Toronto, you know, and yet they
Right,
have ties. They have great ties to the Canadian team, Raptors, right? And it would be,
right,
and
yeah.
it would sound I don't know. It doesn't sound preposterous to assume that there should be a team closer to some of these kids growing up so that they can go to games and watch them, right? I mean, there's hockey games here.
Yeah.
There's the Oilers and there's the, there's a hockey team in every most in vicinity. You can go to one for sure, but
Right.
for
Yeah.
basketball you
Yeah.
don't. But I don't know. I guess like we talked a little bit about building. You talked about building branding. What do you think about the Raptors and their current model of building branding through social media and through videos like Open Gym and things like that?
Well, I think open gyms. I haven't seen an episode in a long time, but I think it's amazing because I think in going back to what you were just saying,
Hmm.
especially for like guys that live in like Alberta and that are not here, I think stuff like open gym is what draws them to the team because people like a team because you kind of know their backstory, right? Like maybe I don't know, a certain player got bullied in high school. He talks about that, and you play basketball and you live in the Northwest Territories, and that story resonates with you. So you really like this like backup point guard, for the Raptors. Let's just say he did get bullied. So then that story draws you to the Raptors, and then you watch a few games, and then you start developing this affinity with the sports team that's like far removed from where you live, right? So yeah, I think like stuff like Open Gym is very, very good, and like it's very good for attracting people that are not from here. Even though like I think people in Toronto who are Raptors fans love the episodes.
I really liked. I mean,
Um,
I really liked Drake wearing the Humboldt Broncos jersey.
yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah.
thought that was huge because now you have a huge like I mean people think that Toronto is so far removed from everywhere else in the country,
Right.
but the Humboldt Broncos brought this country together, I think,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that's what a tragedy. Now Open Gym. Now the thing is with Open Gym is that it is still primarily focused on Toronto. Imagine if some of these NBA players were to go out and do promotions out in the prairies or in the Maritimes to get a
Right. Yeah.
following that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. And they do that, right? They do play in different cities right before the season. I know, like, they'll come out. I know the Raptors recently, last summer, like, played in Hamilton. I know that's still close to Toronto, but they will, like, strategically sometimes, do camps or have games in areas that the Raptors, you know, don't play in, which is Toronto.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I don't know if you knew this, but the GM of the Raptors, super young guy. He's like 33 years old, and essentially he's second in command, right? He's works right under Ujiri. His name's Bobby Webster, and he's a Japanese Canadian, Japanese American, but he's from Hawaii. So what the Raptors orchestrated is they like brought the Raptors to Hawaii to play a few games, I think last summer,
Right.
and that was definitely, like Bobby trying to grow the game globally.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's no reason that they wouldn't do that for other provinces, and like you said, it would really help if they did that, and I think they do that. I think they were in Newfoundland, I think last year.
Odometer says here,
Yeah.
often Canadians cheer for U.S. teams in proximity. Maritimers cheer for the Celtics. Windsor cheers
Okay.
for the Detroit
Yeah.
Pistons. Winnipeg with the Minnesota team. And because of politics, many Canadians would rather see anyone win rather than Toronto. I find that that's almost like a catch-22. So on the one hand, you say you can't build another NBA team anywhere else in Canada because there's simply there's not enough support, but on the other hand, it's like these teams are Canadians are so desperate to cheer for a team that they'd rather cheer for a U.S. team simply because they can go to those games.
Right. Okay.
I don't know. That's how I see it right now,
Yeah.
and it's kind
Yeah.
of like a weird spot.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. Like,
But
what's your take on that? Like, you've been out to New Brunswick, you've done some traveling yourself.
yeah. Um. So what's my take on?
Oh, just like the whole not being able to have a second team, or like, is that should we is Toronto are the Toronto Raptors going to build globally, or they're going to build in their own country? Something like that. Like you said that they went out to Hawaii to
Right,
build
yeah.
branding.
Right, yeah. But yeah, like what he was saying too, um, I think the like building a team, or the possibility of having like a second team, would work, because like let's say you're let's say they brought the Grizzlies back, right? Or maybe it's called something else, but they bring another team back. Like that team could be rivals with like the Portland Trailblazers, and different Cali teams like the Golden State. If they're good enough, they could be legitimate contenders with other West Coast teams like the Warriors, um, Clippers. So yeah, I think even the NBA would potentially be interested in doing that.
Mm,
Although I know that I don't know in detail, but I know like the NBA was tinkering with the idea of like even expanding to England, and that's why like I think the Celtics and another
right.
team like had a game out there. Um, so from the NBA's perspective, I think they're trying to expand
Yeah.
like globally rather than tap like the north of the border market.
So Odometer goes and talks about fan numbers mean nothing in pro sports. It's all funding. You don't need fans if you have corporate sponsorship. So this idea is that fan base is insignificant. You just need big corporate money and TV contracts.
Right, but then if you don't have fans, why would corporations or donors sponsor your team?
Right,
Because then
right.
there's nobody to see your sponsorship, right?
It almost comes hand in hand. That's cool. That's
Yeah,
cool. I'm gonna move on here and ask you a little bit more about some more philosophical questions. But I mean, even in the
yeah.
maybe I'll talk a little bit about the Raptors. How excited are you right now about them uh, beating the Wizards 2-0 in the series, and that
Yeah.
the
So
Cavs? Yeah.
to be honest with you, maybe I'm overconfident in the Raptors, but I haven't seen any of the first two games. I just saw the box score. I know, the Raptors dropped 130 points in the second game. Maybe it's partially because I just expect them to like stomp on Washington, and it's like the next round is when it matters.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, no, I'm super excited. I think obviously the bench has always been a big story this whole year. Yeah, I think they could legitimately get to the finals, even though I know LeBron's a different animal in the playoffs. It's almost like the regular season is like preseason to him, and it just turns it on in the
I
playoffs.
like watching the post game interviews, and as much as
Yeah,
I say I like them, it's almost like repetitive. I mean, on the surface, it's like these guys are repeating themselves. They're asking the same questions over and over again. But I focus
yeah,
more
yeah,
on this one question that was asked of DeMar. Um, was that Wizards were setting traps on DeMar and Lowry because they're the best players, and so when they set the traps, um, in
yes.
turn he says that they're working harder to trust the team to perform under those conditions. Um, what do you think about this idea that we have these stars and traps run on certain players, and that do you notice that the Raptors are trusting each other more, or is that something that they've tried to work on for a while now?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that partially plays in how good the bench is, right? And how like the supporting cast is. And what happens in the trap is that um, essentially it's two people that apply pressure on this one guy, and as a defender or the defending team, what you hope for is a turnover, or you get possession of the ball. But what that also does is there's a risk involved, because if you try to trap one guy, that's gonna leave one man open, right? And
Hmm.
on defense, you're probably gonna sag off the guy that's probably the weakest link on the court. So like, let's say he's wide open for a three, you're just gonna have to trust that guy to make the shot and give the ball to him,
Right,
because he's a bit more isolated.
right.
Yeah,
And as a layman, I've noticed that like even as a lay, I don't even watch basketball as much as some people do. And the funny thing is, I find that I growing up with people, all my friends who played sports, and I never played sports. That anytime that I talked about sports, it was almost like you're not allowed to because you didn't play. So I've always had this like thing in my heart. I was just like, I don't have the right to say anything about the sports. But even as someone like me, I noticed the bench has improved dramatically over the last couple of years, and like players like Pirtle, for example, one of my favorite Raptors players, is that I've watched him grow as a player.
Yeah.
And it's incredible to see that kind of stuff happen. And I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see how they turn out, and what you say, activating that bench.
Right, yeah.
Do you expect athletes to provide detailed commentary when they sit after in those post game interviews? Because you watch those YouTube videos, it's all over YouTube, and you look at those comments. Last year, when Lowry and DeRozan weren't performing well, the fans were very mean to them. And this year they're performing well, they're doing well, and all the fans are like, yeah, good job, Raptors. Meanwhile, John Wall and the whole Wizards team, they're getting a huge flack from the fans. Like, it's so ironic that's the case, But do you expect athletes to provide detailed commentary, or should athletes be expected to be role models, or are they just paid to perform and not to produce what we expect them as people who watch TV?
Those are good questions. Yeah, I don't think. I think the reason why, we personally, sorry, to answer your question, I don't think that, they should necessarily, we shouldn't expect them to be role models. They are there to really just win a basketball game, right? Like, they're there to make the team better. And really that's their only goal, to like be the best basketball player you can be. Like, you're not, like, whether you choose to kneel, whether you choose to, tell kids to do their homework and focus on school, that's more secondary, right? But I think it's just like, as a culture, I think we just expect that of these athletes because we glamorize them, They get paid so much money because we watch them play. You know what I mean? So it's really just our expectations that we just thrust on them because, DeMar DeRozan is a superhero, or LeBron is a superhero. And it's not like that money is coming out of nowhere. Like, they're so rich because so many people support it. We watch the games. We watch the games on TV. We, go to the games. We buy merchandise. So, I mean, yeah, like, it's more of our expectations, rather than, I don't think that they necessarily have to, even though we like to thrust that expectation on them.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah,
I
mean,
just,
it helps. Yeah, I think it's, and sorry to expand on what you're saying. I think it's great when guys use their platform as basketball players to do other things, right? Whether it's political, whether it's like entrepreneurial, I think that's very, very important. But I don't think we should ever, be like, oh yeah, every basketball player should be like Colin Kaepernick,
right.
or everybody should, yeah, everybody should be protesting the system. Yeah, no, I think that's unfair to, expect that on a basketball player. Just as, you don't expect, some random, like an average Joe to like to do other things that his, that's outside of his job scope, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good point, man. And I'm sure that I like asking you philosophical questions because you yourself has your previous occupation was that you worked for some of the highest courts in Ontario, Ontario courts.
Yeah.
Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about what you did during that time. I visited you a couple of times in Toronto at your
Yeah.
office. These beautiful buildings, old beautiful buildings in Toronto that are relatively hidden and nobody really knows unless they have to go for court, and you walk into these
Right. Yeah.
buildings and there's just massive cathedral looking like high ceilings, high security areas. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your time working for the government and give me the 411 on that.
411 on that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, what I do is I'm a court usher and monitor at the Court of Appeal, which is like the highest court in the province. Well, technically, like the Supreme Court of Canada is the highest, but that's federal, right? So in Ontario, the Ontario Court of Appeal is the highest. And yeah, just like a synopsis. Um, yeah, so what I do is I like set up for the judges, make sure that all the court proceedings are recorded accurately,
Hmm.
and I take down court, which means like taking all the book materials back, and just stocking the court, making sure that everything runs smoothly, and just assisting the judges whenever necessary, making their jobs easier so they don't have to do the grunt work, and they can just focus on making a decision. Um, but yeah, like what have I learned?
Well, no, I mean, I've always
Yeah,
like picked your brain because you've seen you followed some pretty high profile cases while you were working there. You were
right, yeah.
I mean, it's funny because I was doing some research. A lot of the cases are public. You can actually click the links
Oh
on the
yeah, yeah,
Ontario, and
yeah.
you can
No,
actually read. I
absolutely,
didn't
yeah.
know that was possible. You can read everything that has happened from yesterday to like 1997 and all the big cases. So maybe you can share a little bit about some of the high profile cases that you've followed, and it's always interesting. It's always interesting to hear you talk about them.
Yeah. So I think one of the this is like obviously a huge thing right now, right? The sexual assault with the Me Too movement. Um, that always makes the headlines. But it's one thing I've seen that's interesting about like sexual assault cases is obviously when somebody is raped and they're convicted, that never makes the news, right? It only makes the news when there's a victim and yeah, the accused gets off, or is given like a slap in the hand, and people will say like, oh, the justice system is completely corrupt, or it's completely rigged, or it never is sympathetic to victims. But there are many cases where, yeah, like I can think of one. Like I mean, there's many, but one that sticks out in my mind is, I think like a OHL or like a junior A hockey player, um, had sex with a girl, an underage girl, like in a club, like in a bathroom stall. And yeah, he got, I think, I can't remember if it was 5 years or 3 years, but he did get time in prison for what he had done, right? Um, so stuff like that, like, yeah, it makes the local news, but I don't think it gets national attention because it's whenever there's loopholes or whenever there's, I guess, what people consider miscarriages of justice. When that happens, that's what, makes the news.
Because the very fact that the perpetrator was not sentenced or the accused was not sentenced is controversial in itself. I mean, is that like the basis? Like that's why there was so much more public
Right,
following or
yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, and I think it's when, the public kind of feels like they know that, like with Gomeshi, people know that, he was a creep, and there's probably no denying that he was a creep. Um, and it's like, oh yeah, no, we know that, uh, we had a lot, like you probably forcefully had rough sex with these people, but you get off scot-free. And I think that's when people think like, that's, they'll take that one instance and be like, I shouldn't say people, but there's a lot of people. There's a segment of the population that will say like, "Oh, okay, this is why, our whole justice system is broken." You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I think in some ways, I think in university, like I would have taken sort of more of that opinion, but I think I've sort of sort of been able to see it from like the bureaucratic side and realize that, well, you're gonna have unfavorable outcomes or unfavorable decisions, but also like there are definitely people who would argue against this, but it's hard to make like a sexual assault case based on like a balance of probabilities, which is the standard that's used in like civil law, right? So if you sue someone and 51%, there's a 51% chance that, you probably owe this guy some money, you're gonna have to pay up. But with the criminal justice system, the way it works is it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which is like 90, like when you are guilty, you are 99.9% probably guilty of what you did, right? So it's a high standard. So why should, they lower that standard just for um one type of crime?
Hmm.
Yeah. But I mean, there has been a shift, right? Like there's I recently read this thing about how more people are going to like the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal and are suing people for like suing the perpetrator for sexual assault um, based on the balance of probabilities rather than trying to take them to like, a criminal court.
How does that work when you have someone, a foreigner, come to the Ontario court to carry on a case? So, for example, today I was reading about some Ecuadorian, I believe, or Peruvian. I don't know where they are, but they're indigenous people of the certain country taking up a case against an oil company, and they are in Ontario doing it. How does that work, or am I completely off?
Yeah, I think, are you talking about the Chevron case?
Yeah, the Chevron case. That's right. That's right.
Right. So I don't know a whole lot about that case, but from what I know, I think Chevron is trying to say that they're not responsible because this was happening um, Ecuador or Bolivia, like a Latin American country. Um, but your question is, how do they
Yeah, why is it that they're
bring
doing it
them
in
to court?
Ontario?
That I'm not sure.
Hmm.
I haven't. Yeah, I'm not sure.
It's cool because it's yeah. I was reading on the news today, and it was just like these indigenous people were at Ecuador. They're dressed in their traditional
Right.
gear, and it's
Yeah.
so awesome to see them do that. Like, but I'm just wondering why two of these. I'm gonna put this up on the screen here, but it says here Chevron Canada should pay. Oh, it's Chevron Canada should pay for pollution in Ecuador, and so that's why I guess they're in Ontario.
Right. But
Uh,
that's a civil case.
that's a civil case. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I got to read more into that. So, are you working in the courts now?
Yeah, I still am.
So, and then what are some differences between the different provinces? So when we talk about the judicial system in Alberta, we also have the Supreme Court, and then you have
Yeah.
the other two courts. I think
Well, the Supreme Court, sorry, the Supreme Court's the same across. Like it's one court in Ottawa,
Oh, okay,
right?
okay,
Yeah, but like in Alberta, I know there's like the Queen's Bench, I think
that's right,
that's what
that's right.
it's. So that's the Court of Appeal. That's your version of the my Court of Appeal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So can you
that's your
explain that?
appellate
Like
court.
I have no idea how that works. Maybe you
Right.
can tell me.
So the I guess the justice system, the way it works is like there's lower courts, right?
Hmm.
So in Ontario, um, you have the Ontario Court of Justice, which is the lowest court. And then right above that, you have the Superior Court of Justice. So Superior Court of Justice is like for indictable offenses, which is like 2 years plus. So usually, like, you commit murder, you're gonna be going to this SEJ, which is this Superior Court of Justice. And for smaller cases, like let's say you get in a fight at a bar, you're probably gonna be at the OCJ, right? And then so SCJ and OCJ is where all the trial happens. So that's where all the drama, the courtroom drama, the witnesses, the cross examinations, that's where that happens. So at the trial level, a trial judge will hand down a decision, right? So they could say, okay, well, you are guilty for X offense and you're getting 5 years in prison.
Mm-hmm.
And now the accused. The Crown can appeal as well, but a lot of the times it's the accused who'll probably say like, okay, well, the judge made an error in the decision, and my sentence should not be 10 years. It should be 9.5 or 9 years. Um, and you want to appeal that trial judge's decision, then you go to the Court of Appeal. And then if it's granted, then so all the sorry, if it's granted, then you'll go back down to the the lower court and have a retrial, right? And then if your case gets dismissed at the Court of Appeal, it means okay, we're not hearing it, which also means that they're upholding the lower court's decision, right? So what they can do, their recourse, if their case is dismissed at the Court of Appeal, is they can take it to the Supreme Court.
Mm.
But the thing is, there's something called a leave, which is like a notice that you file to the Supreme Court saying like, oh, I have this case, I want to appeal it. That once you file a leave, like only like I think 3% of cases like they're accepted at the Supreme Court. So it's not like you get rejected at the Court of Appeal, and it doesn't mean that your case is actually gonna be fully heard. You're gonna be able to argue an appeal at the Supreme Court. At the Supreme Court, it only gets heard if they see that your case is of like national importance. And there's one more thing I wanted to say is with the courts, what it is you have this hierarchy of like the Supreme Court at the top, the Court of Appeal, which is the appellate court, and then these lower courts because all the decisions are binding, right? So the Supreme Court's decision will trump, what's made at the Court of Appeal, and like the Court of Appeal, whatever their decision is binding on the lower courts.
Mm.
And that's why, if a trial judge really messes up and the accused takes their case to the Court of Appeal, and the judge at the Court of Appeal finds that the lower judge made a decision, that person can go back down and have a new trial and possibly have a different outcome.
Wow. And then
So it's a very long and
it seems like
tedious process.
yes.
Yeah.
What is the have you been following the Bruce MacArthur case? The
No, not too much. I know it's huge. But to be honest, no, not really.
that's making
Not really, yeah.
headlines, a lot of
Yeah,
headlines, but
no.
nobody really talks about it. You know what I mean? Like I don't talk about it. We don't hear it in the office or like at water cooler. I mean, it's not like it's great conversation to have
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah,
a
yeah.
serial killer. But yeah, man. I've heard you talk about seeing some of these huge cases go down, and I can't imagine like you work behind the scenes. And do you ever feel like you need to express your opinion, or because as a judge, or well, you're not. I mean, in the court, in the perspective of the court, you want to hold an objective perspective on everything. So, do
Yeah.
you find that you need when you have a drink with someone, or when you hang out and you go to the bar and you kick back? Do you ever need to express yourself and to talk about these things that are happening? And where do you go about how do you go about having these discussions and interactions?
Um, yes, I don't know if this really answers the question, but the weird thing is, I think working at the court, I think what's that one thing that has taught me is like how little like my opinion actually matters, right? So it's like nobody cares, you know what I mean? Like nobody cares that you think that that person didn't get a fair sentence. It's like, no, that's just the way it is. It's like he gets 5 years, he gets 5 years. And it's like, it's not so much my opinion that matters, but to really understand why, that person got the sentence he did or maybe got off, right? Um, so, yeah, I think
Would that mean? I mean,
Yeah,
Teru, that means that the process is
yeah.
not transparent.
What's that?
It would. Does that mean that that means that it's not transparent, and hence our opinions don't matter because we don't know what the process is?
No, no, but I think the actually I'd say it's a complete opposite. I think it is fairly transparent. I think like if you're willing, like nobody really does because it's just t technical and boring. But like you said, those cases are accessible, right? Like if you really want to look into it, do your research, like you can do that. Like that avenue is always open to you. Um, so yeah, I'd say there's actually a decent amount of transparency that does go down. Um, I'm not saying that, like our system is perfect, um, but yeah, I think, and another thing too is I think going back to like trying to understand things rather than like forming like an outright opinion on it, is that, um, as I just explained, the court system, it's like long and tedious, and I think from when you're on the outside, it's easy to like criticize, our democracy as being like super efficient, and why do people take so much time to like argue these cases? It's like it's a waste of like taxpayers' money, etc. But like at the same time, like when people say it's like, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, it's like it's a real thing, right? So and like and these sort of esoteric ideas of like people having rights, like a person that's accused of committing a crime has a right to an appeal. Yeah, to most people that doesn't mean anything, but the crazy thing is like our democracy is like on the side, in some ways it's like it's on the side of the accused, right? Because like think about it, if he gets convicted for murder, yeah, like he's a piece of shit, but at the same time, like he has that right to appeal that decision because our like democratic system allows him to be like, okay, well, you know what, that judge, even though he's probably right, like he made an error, and I'm gonna argue it. And then there's a bunch of people, like there's three people at the Court of Appeal that are willing to hear this out. You know what I mean? Like if we lived in like a more efficient or tyrannical system, people would just be like, no, like we saw the video, like it's a waste of my time, like get out of here,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, like I think I don't know. I feel like this is a very like public servicey thing to say. It can almost sound scripted, but I think like I've kind of respected our like democracy more,
That's cool.
like being behind the scenes, I guess. Yeah.
And I've said this to you before, but I've also
And
said
like,
that. Oh,
and
sorry.
sorry, and mind you, like think about what these judges do, right? They just spend time like they're like professional book readers. Like they just spend time like poring over these cases just to make sure that like, they didn't like to decide upon whether, an actual error was made or not. So yeah, I think it's a pretty fair and transparent system. It's not always, but yeah, I think it's actually better than it's usually given credit for. But that's also because the whole purpose of like, and this is a good thing, like this is like a function of the media, like in a democratic system, is that you're the criticizer, right? It's always easier to criticize, but that's what the media is supposed to do. That's them doing its job. So if you take the media's perspective on it, yeah, of course you're gonna get a very critical angle on it. So that's why I think um, people are uh, a lot of people like in the Me Too movement are very quick to like just outright say like, oh, our whole justice system um, it like is about this victim blaming thing,
Hmm.
where they don't believe in victims.
That's so interesting, man.
Yeah.
You're making me think about like the public usually sides with which, like, which side do you think the public usually sides with, the media or the
Yeah,
justice
yeah, yeah,
system?
yeah. But it's always easier to like be on the side of the the critic, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that goes back to what I was saying about opinion, because like I cannot understand something and just be like, oh, that sucks. You know what I mean? Or like I could like on a very like minute scale, I could just like see somebody walking by and just be like, ah, I hate that person for no reason. Don't like that person.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to understand, like why is that person the way he is.
Yeah, and so do you argue that?
Yeah.
So if someone who's willfully ignorant, a citizen who is willfully ignorant, um, is that something that needs to be addressed, or is that a state of mind that exists should coexist with someone who is highly critical and goes down several layers to understand something from bottom up?
So sorry, so your question's
Oh, my question
should
is: so there are citizens, and if the average citizen, okay, if citizen A is willfully ignorant, chooses
yeah.
not to understand or chooses not to understand something because it is too complicated or makes them uncomfortable, versus
Yeah.
the highly critical and sort of one that delves deeper into the problem to unpack it and to address it. Can these two people live harmoniously together?
Can they live harmoniously together?
Am I sounding, or does that make sense?
No, it does make sense. Um,
I mean, like
to be honest,
yeah.
I think those two. I know they're a bit like of a caricature, but I think that like those are two like opposite people in some ways, right? Well, I guess they are.
Hmm.
Um,
Can they coexist though? I mean, look at this country, for example. We have rural parts of Canada,
right.
um, inhabited by Canadians, and we have urban epicenters, city centers of inhabited by Canadians who are very different in their ways. We coexist together in this country that we call Canada, this sort of like
Yeah.
massive swath of land, but there are people
Right.
who choose not to understand certain things because it's too much, it's too complicated. Why should they bother with that when it doesn't matter to them, versus people who try to get into every little detail and go on the Ontario court website and look up cases and try to understand it on their free time as a hobby?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Can they coexist? Good question.
I'm just sorry,
Yeah,
I'm just kind of, I mean, this
I
is,
think so.
you know.
I think so. Yeah. But and again, I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but it's funny you say that because like on one hand, I feel like I am that first person that you described, like is willfully negligent, or like you asked me about Bruce. So here's the thing: you asked me about like Bruce MacArthur, or on a different case, like you could ask me about Trump. And right now, to be honest with you, I've been paying zero attention, right? And it's not that that's deliberate, but like for me, like I find that a lot of the times, like knowing about something and like not doing it, doing anything about it is just like wasteful knowledge in some ways. Like what, and this goes back to like, my opinions don't mean anything, right? So like if I'm like, oh, okay, well, the trial judge made, I don't think the trial judge was fair towards Bruce MacArthur, or I think Trump's an idiot because of A, B, and C. Like, what good does that opinion do if I don't actually do anything about it? So if I'm willing to do something about it, I'll like learn about it and study it, and you know, and maybe I'll do that later on. But like right now, I just find that like doing that just like a waste of my time if I don't act on it, right? Um,
Hmm.
so I think those two people are like what you said. I think those are two opposite people because I think a lot of people were like very knowledgeable and they know things in and out. It's almost like they just do that for the sake of just their own entertainment or their own edification, right? So yeah, it's just something to pass the time, um, to like study everything inside and out and not do anything about it. And then people who are willfully negligent. Um, so you're essentially saying what somebody that's just ignorant. and maybe
Yeah.
racist
I guess in metaphor. Yeah. I know.
decide to change their ways. Yeah. I don't know. Like, I guess you can't ever force that person to change their views, right? You just have to hope that like maybe something happens in their life that you know uh, they change those views.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think the bookish person that knows the ins and outs of the justice system is somehow going to enlighten the racist person. You know what I mean?
That's a good point.
Um, yeah, yeah,
You make me think about how I've said to you before that as a teacher I rely on many of my close friends. I don't have a lot of close friends, but I rely on close friends to validate their experiences for me so that I don't have to go do my research on certain things because there's too many
yeah,
things in the world to do, right? So, for example,
right,
if I ever wanted an opinion, I would turn to a friend that I've known for a while that I trust for his or her opinion,
right.
to inform me, as opposed to me
Hmm.
going to all these types of sources and to
And
spend 5 years researching something.
yeah, and I mean that's also the reason why people like read news from trusted publications, right? Like you don't have to be a scientist to like understand global warming. Like you just trust the sources. Like you trust that the Globe and Mail is not gonna lie to you,
Yeah.
or they're just lying to you just for the sake of lying to you. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like you pick it up or you
that's true.
read something online because you're just like, oh, okay, well, I could trust like John Smith, who's on this site. It says that he's like a climate expert. Like, hopefully that's true,
All
you
right.
know? Yeah, you don't have the time to be like, oh, okay, well, what school did he go to? I'm gonna link them. I'm gonna go to LinkedIn and check what school he went to,
Right,
and
right.
then contact all his friends to see how.
How much of a stand-up dude he is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yo, man,
Yeah.
it makes me feel like systems are important, man. So, I mean, to an extent, systems are important in place. Uh, I wouldn't trust the average person to make big discussions. I mean, obviously,
Right. Yeah.
systems flawed, and we can go into another 2 hours talking about how systems are flawed. We both went to
Right.
different academic spheres that talk about that
Right.
and break
Yeah.
that stuff down. But
Yeah.
but I would definitely have your perspective over some other Joe Schmo, unless
Yeah.
unless I would rather get it from you, and
Yeah.
especially if we're shooting like the crap. You and I go out
Yeah.
to the bar, have a drink. Like listening to you is definitely better than listening to some average dude that I've just met or someone I just randomly met. So
Okay. Thank you.
I don't know. So
Yeah.
um, I really appreciate you coming on the show, dude.
No, for sure, man.
Um,
Thanks for having me.
what's next for you, man? What are your plans? Where are you going? Where are you headed? What are some top priorities for Teru Aikida?
Top priorities for Teru Aikida is to find a writing gig, a paid writing gig or a communications gig.
Your writing's awesome, man.
Thanks, man. But like to actually, like
I can't wait until
pay
they hire
rent.
you to get to events.
What's
Like
that?
if they put you through events, if you get people to go, listen, we want you to cover this event, take on this
Yeah.
role, and that is far better than having to do grassroots journalism. I think is when you have direction from a source that trusts you. I think you're gonna get there, man. I think you're
Appreciate
already
that.
there, bro. You're already there.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
just that you have just have to overcome that step. Maybe you just look too young, dude. I don't know. This is something I'm dealing with right now. Is like in my profession is that
Yeah.
my clientele doesn't
Right.
respect the way I look.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, I don't think they respect. I think they don't really, and it takes a long time to prove my
Yeah.
metal. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I got my medals. Look. Look at that LeBron. Look at that LeBron line.
Well, yeah, man, that's good, dude. Thanks for
Yeah.
sharing your thoughts and taking time, get the patience to listen to someone who knows nothing about sports, man.
No, no, not at all, man. And I'm really glad you're doing this, and I hope you continue doing it.
Yeah,
'Cause I
thanks,
think
man.
it's awesome, man.
Thanks, man.
Yeah,
Appreciate it, dude. All right,
yeah.
well, you have a good night, and we'll touch base
All right,
off
man.
stream. Thanks, bro.
Peace.
Peace. thank you very much for those of you who joined us today, and we're closing off the stream tonight. Stay tuned for an article that I'm going to write about Teru. Follow him on medium.com/@Teru Ikeda. I put the link in the stream. Check out his writing. Definitely a good sports writer. Cheers. Have a good night, guys.